to be more creative? The creative process is just that, a process. Explore that process with award-winning novelist Michael Lister and other artists from a variety of mediums about having a more fulfilling and fruitful creative process.
So, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm joined by a fantastic writer and a dear friend tonight, Tony Simmons. And Tony will be able to talk to us about a lot of different types of writing and creativity, and I really look forward to that. Tony, why don't you just introduce yourself to everyone, tell them a little bit about yourself and what you do, your creativity.
Okay. I'm Tony Simmons. I've been a journalist for going on 25 or 30 years, with the News Herald for over 20 years in Panama City. Currently doing entertainment writing and working with our digital platforms. And that's my day job. And then every night is in here chasing after the stories that are in my brain. I've written a few novels, a bunch of short stories, and I'm currently working on, I think I have 4 projects going right now. So, the ADHD is...
Nice. Let's talk about the 2 different types of writings that you just mentioned, although you talked about novels and short stories, but let's categorize that as fiction. And then your columns and reporting, let's classify that. So between those 2, can you tell me a little bit about the process of each and sort of compare and contrast your approach to each one?
Well, yes. I think that my approach to both of them is much the same. Because, one of the rules of writing fiction is to notice everything.
Right.
Listen. Pay attention to what's going on around you. Get the details. And if you're, if you're any good at journalism, that's what you try to do, is to really pay attention and reproduce what you see and what you hear and what you learn for a reader in as clear and concise a fashion as you possibly can. So in journalism, no matter, I've worked all over the newsroom. I've done entertainment writing, lifestyle. I've done in-depth and series reporting. I've done cops and courts and education and health and, a little bit of everything. And all of it has the same rule. You want to get, there's no such thing as both sides of the story. It's all sides of the story.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
And just, try to communicate that in as clear a that you possibly can. And that is what you do as a fiction writer in a lot of ways. Is you notice, you process it, and then you try to tell your story in a way that
That's incredible.
Turning the page.
I was actually looking for a book on my shelf back here because of something you said. One of my favorite quotes from one of my favorite writers, Frederick Buechner, he says, "Listen to your life. See it for the fathomless mystery that it is, in the boredom of it as well as in the ecstatic, exciting parts of it." And the truth of what you're saying, to listen, which of course requires you being fully present in the moment, aware, open. That's a great way to live. And I've often thought that my practice of that increased exponentially when I started writing, when I started paying greater attention. And I think it's so cool. I definitely have witnessed you do that in a lot of different ways. and your writing is just fine. I mean, just exquisite. And one of the things I appreciate about it the most is that you can tell you are listening, and because of your attention, the details you pull out, I just think, especially as often as you're producing a column, and the writing you're doing weekly, daily, but weekly, that I read it, is it's just a testament to what you're saying. I mean, you are practicing what you're preaching, what you're saying. You do listen, and because you do that, you have helped others listen and see some moments we would have otherwise missed. So I appreciate you saying that. Now, more than that, I appreciate you doing it. And it's interesting that you say that both of those are the same, that you take the same approach, whether you're writing fiction or your column or reporting.
Well, it's reporter's notebook, right? We have all these nice, we can record your voice, we can take video, we can do all of this. But for me, it's always come back to this, to taking notes. Often these days, it's writing down that one little salient thing that jumps out at me. But then when I start working on fiction, it's this stuff. I'm still doing it by hand. I haven't always done it by hand. I went back to doing it by hand. With that, I don't know if it's just the physical connection to it, or if it's my mind is just used to finding those moments that way. I have a friend that says that when I'm going to hold my hands up here, when we're typing, we're using a more analytical part of our brain, and when we're writing with our hand, or hand writing, we're using the same part of your brain that the artist uses to paint or to draw. And so in using both of those, you kind of get in touch with every bit of yourself that way, I would suppose.
So you're not just taking notes. Are you actually doing your drafts, your first drafts, or you're in longhand as well?
Yes.
Nice.
And I didn't always do that. I spent years doing nothing but, I mean, when Brother put out his first word processor, I went to electronics. And then for some reason or other, later on, I decided, I always have my notebook with me. I'm always writing down, little ideas or things. And I decided to start handwriting again. And one of my favorite authors, Neil Gaiman, that's his process. He walks down his garden, back of his house, or wherever he's at, and he sits down with a legal-sized pad and starts handwriting. I just carry a notebook with me wherever I go, and sit at the coffee shop or sit at the park, or wait for the meeting to start.
Right.
And I did notice when I switched back to using the notebook that it seemed like I was using a different vocabulary.
Wow.
I think that my writing changed. And I'm still trying to be aware of it and to see where it leads. But I feel like I'm almost more free with the notebook than I am when I'm typing. If I'm typing, I'm going back and fixing things, In the notebook, I'm just going.
Right.
And I'll go back and I'll write something sideways in the margin, scratch out a word, but I just keep going. And that's the other. What are the rules for writing? Sit your ass in the chair and write. Finish what you start. So you got to keep going.
Right.
Keep going back and fixing. You got to finish it. Those are my two rules.
Good rules. As you were saying that, it reminded me that John Updike wrote longhand, and he wrote well into his 80s, but he did according to, interviews, things he said, I think he did every book that way, and he also used a legal pad and just went and sat down and wrote, It's interesting you were talking about that process, and I use a keyboard. Always have. I have. When I was in third grade, I came home and asked my mom what atrocious meant. And she said, "Why?" And I said, "Because my Miss Register, my teacher, said my handwriting was atrocious." And my handwriting is so poor that I use it all the time, but in notes and lists, I'm a lister. You know, I make all kind of lists, and I when I journal, you know, but all of my writing, fiction, my you know, even essays and things, it's always been on a keyboard. But
See that list?
nice,
yeah.
nice. But the process is the same. When you talked about, you know, not going back, not fixing, you know, I go straight through. I do the draft, and there's a very big movement right now among authors to use Dragon and talk their books into existence, to speak them. And some of the more successful people doing that are their output is unbelievable. You know, they're doing over 5,000 words an hour, you know, which is just astounding. But I just can't imagine. For me, it's tactile, it's touching the keys, it is the process of, in fact, I don't want to go that fast. You know, I like, and there are times where, for me, one paragraph might take several hours, and then sometimes a page will flow in 10 minutes. It's, you know, do you have a similar experience, and has writing longhand slowed you down or sped you up, or can you tell a difference in the speed?
No, because I think I have, like I said, I have several projects usually going at the same time. So while I'm writing this one longhand, I'm working on the second draft or the third draft of something else, and I just move back and forth between them. Like tonight, before you called, I was editing on the second book in my Caliban cycle. But this afternoon, I had my notebook out, and I was writing notes for this pulp fiction story that I'm working on. So I don't really think it's slowed me down. I think it's allowed me maybe to compartmentalize those a little better, because I know which one I'm actually busy with, and I can keep them separated in my head,
Right.
because they're separated in the real world too.
Are you editing on a computer, like most of your final draft or your several drafts in, you are using a computer or a word processor to edit?
Yes, I use Word.
And so, for me at least, that's two different parts of my brain, right? The creativity and then the editing. And I would think, since you're taking two different approaches to those two activities, that would put a line of demarcation even more so, you know, in what you're doing.
Splits it off pretty evenly. So for the process, I will maybe write a first draft in the notebook, maybe in some cases just as I did the other day, almost a script, because it was a kind of a dialogue heavy scene. So I'm just, one character says this, next character, and that's all I have. And when I go to put it into the computer, I'm expanding on it as I go. So it's almost like a second draft as it's going on to the computer. Then that'll get cleaned up before it goes to my critique group, and they have, you know, their slings and arrows, and then I set it aside. I don't take what they've given me immediately and go back and change or make alterations. I'll keep that in mind as I go forward, particularly if they have really good ideas. You know, that was great, I should have done that before, and I can, okay, now from here on, I'm going to pretend that's what I already wrote, and, you know, so I keep writing. But then when I'm done with the whole project, I take all of those pages and all their notes, and the notes that I take during our discussion of those notes, and go back through to do an edit on that. And then after that, there's, you know, the read through, reading things out loud. You know, who knows how many times it's been read and reread and rewritten by the time it's done. And then when you get the book back in your hands and you look at it and you go, on page 3, there's a typo.
Right. Yeah. Wow. Let's talk a little bit more about your process. First of all, let's start with your column.
Okay.
You're writing a weekly column, something you've done for how long now?
Since 1994.
Wow. That is a lot of columns.
Yes.
Earlier you were talking about listening, and I mentioned Buechner saying, the most important thing we can do is listen to our lives. I would think to get inspired, to get material for a weekly column, you have to do a lot of listening and being open and searching. But tell us a little bit about your process and how, and I'll just say, your columns are excellent. So I'm asking you, I'm not asking you to say this, I'm asking you, how have you maintained that excellence for so long?
I think that I'm going to accept what you're saying. Okay, in order to answer your question.
Right. Put you on the spot.
I look at those columns and I can find a few that I'm really happy with, and a few that I wish had never seen ink, and more than a few that are just honestly, okay, I'm punting this week. This happened in town, I'm going to write about it. Those ones that you're thinking of, I think, are the ones where I have made the time to be present and to look for what's going on in life around me that is really worth writing about and living and experiencing. The first thing that pops to my mind when I think of a column I'm really happy with is one right outside my window here. When we first moved into this house a few years ago, it's really dark out here. We're almost alone, even though we're in Panama City Beach. It's just a great secluded area, and we can cut off our lights and go put a blanket out in the street and lie down when there's a meteor shower. Wow. And just lie on the street and watch the stars. And that was the first thing when you started talking about columns, that I felt like that was one of my favorite columns. Or whenever life, punches you in the throat and you take that stumble back and you have to realize what's important. And at that point, it's not about look at this wonderful thing that we all should be aware of. It's about being willing, and this is kind of difficult, being willing to expose yourself, the mistake you made or the pain you felt, and being able to be honest about that in print for strangers to read. And those are the ones I get, emails or letters about. And those are the hardest ones to write. But they're the ones that are the most worthwhile to write. Just like anything else.
Right. Yeah, you're
if it was easy, everybody would do it.
Right. That's right. But you're sharing a vulnerability. You are reaching into your soul, and that's the thing that touches other souls, other people in the same way. Right.
You wonder where it is. So, yeah.
I don't know if it was last week's column or I think it was. I think you were talking about an event, a local event, and you were talking about dragging your kids to it, and I love the way you said it, and then how you brought it back around, and that's just, to me, that's just genius, and it's to be able to do it in so few words, what is do you have a word limit on your column?
No, it's more of an inch count, in the times when I was on a full broadsheet page, you get about 18 inches of column space. Now I can get 25 or 30 if I need to, still have a photo, But I don't ever really think about that. I just try to find what feels right. Now, as far as bringing things back around, I've always felt like that was kind of, in a way, the writer's responsibility. If you start out somewhere, you need to let that pay off somehow. Some authors will tell you, they call it mirroring. When you get to the midpoint of your manuscript, now you're mirroring your first half of your manuscript to the end. What happens at the end has to reflect back on how it began. Okay. I just, in journalism school, it was called Wall Street Journal style, which was to start with a person who has a particular problem, which makes it personal,
right,
then expand that to show how that is indicative of a national problem or a trend, and then explore all of that, and then end back up with that person you started with. That was their suggested style, and it works.
Yeah. Yes, it does. It's interesting. That's you could certainly call that a technique. And of course, we all, whatever medium we use to create, we use techniques. But I think there's something about the way you do it, the way people who are proficient, who've done, made the investment, put in the hours, put in the time, the technique really disappears, and it doesn't seem like a technique. It doesn't seem like even really a structure or a genre even. It's just that those things sort of fall away, and you're left with something that's living tissue as opposed to whatever's beneath it.
Yeah, and important that the reader doesn't see your technique happen.
Right.
Maybe afterwards, when they're thinking about it, they go, "Oh, okay, I saw how they did it," but not at the time that they're in there. You should not be visible to your reader.
Do you see yourself as more of a craftsman or an artist, or obviously a combination of both, or when you're doing different things, or sometimes in reporting, are you more a craftsman than when you're writing a short story, you're more an artist?
Oh, absolutely, yeah, that's correct. I think that with any art or craft, there are people who are naturally have natural ability, that do have a innate talent. But also with any art or craft, you get better the more you practice. It's something you can learn to do. So those people sitting back there saying, "I can't draw a straight line," well, not until you try.
Right.
And then try again, and then try again until you get it right. And that's the way it is with writing. It is a craft. But particularly in journalism, it's a craft. Because you have certain expectations of style and the shape of a story, and getting your who, what, when, where, why, and how right there at the top. Whereas with fiction, it's, for me, I think I like to push into something I haven't done before. I mean, my buddy Mark says that every time I bring something in, it's a different genre. My first novel was a southern slice of life kind of, set in a small town in modern day, and then I've got a Christian fantasy horror What have I got up here? Zombie novel. I'm writing a pulp adventure set in 1933. I've got a steampunk western that I've got started
Nice.
working at a cyberpunk noir that I'm working on. So yeah, for me that's part of it is the challenge and right, new approaches, trying new worlds. I spent 2008 was a rough year personally, and I never believed in writer's block. It's not a thing. There are days that I don't feel like writing. Okay, but nothing's ever going to stop me from writing. 2008, I couldn't write. I hit the wall, and every time I sat down, I felt like, and it was psychological. It was, why am I doing this? This doesn't mean anything. And I had a friend who asked me to write for his website, which he wanted me to do reporting and feature stories, which I couldn't do. It was going to be, it would clash with my job. I said, how about this? I write something every day for the next year. Something. Some kind of fiction, a poem, something. And that got me started back writing. But it was an experiment, it was, and I think that's, the allure of something new is part of what keeps me coming back. Doing something I haven't done before. I don't know if that answered your question. I think I just kind of went.
No, that was great. Fantastic, actually.
And if that doesn't work, you can always sonic it.
Nice. Do you find both nonfiction / reporting / essay / column writing and fiction, short stories, novels, the experimental stuff you've been talking about, equally fulfilling?
It's funny, in the journalism, I guess I should say they're fulfilling in different ways. For me, in journalism, it is important to me, or particularly when I was a young reporter, it was important to me to tell the story better than anybody else in our area that was trying to tell it, and to make people understand the things that, to me, I thought in my beat at that time, this is the important stuff. You need to know about this, and that was fulfilling. One of, I've got some awards up here for that stuff. That was nice. But I think one of the nicest thing that was ever said in that period was by one of my former bosses who was at a school board meeting, and he said, well, when we get letters and phone calls telling us Tony has gotten everything wrong and he's terrible, and we get letters and phone calls on the same story telling us Tony got everything right and he's great, he must be doing something okay. Right. And so that was probably, yeah, okay, I'm doing something okay. As far as the fiction goes and the fulfillment there, I think that's just more personal. I had somebody suggest to me last weekend in Books Alive that I could get a novel contract if I would just write something different. You could write this story, and I could get you a novel contract. I said, yeah, but I'd have to write that story.
Right.
That's not my story. That's not my story to write. I don't want to do that. This is what I want, and that's what I'm doing. I'm writing what is in me and needs to be out, and that's the fulfillment. Now, having said that, I was down at City Arts at Matt's Good Coffee, having coffee the other morning, and a couple of people there said, I'm 3/4 through your Caliban book. And I said, oh, okay. I was waiting for, and they wanted to talk about and that was pretty nice. That was a great feeling that somebody had not just become engaged, but invested in those characters that, I've carried around in my head for I don't know how long. So that was pretty cool. But that's like the cherry on top, If that's what you're looking for, you might not ever get it.
Right.
You got to do it for other reasons, and for me, it's telling the story.
That's it. I mean, what you're describing is the artist's journey, I believe, and doing something from your soul, because this is my story to tell. This is my thing to create. This is where the area that I'm inspired in, and I think when we do that, there may or may or may not be an audience for it, but that's the secondary consideration. It is, hey, I'm probably not going to find much peace until I tell this story, until I finish this thing.
Yeah.
I ask you to separate those two things in terms of fulfillment. What about, it seems like you write far more short stories than you do novels. Are you more at home? Do you like the short story as a form better than the novel? Or is it just, do you like them equally? Or what's the relationship there?
Well, over the years I've kind of trained myself to write short. It's just part of journalism. As a kid, I wrote short stories. And that may have been partly because, a novel's really hard to maintain. Even even Century novel, Welcome to the Dawn of a New Century, is basically a collection of short stories. It's interwoven, but each piece really stands alone. I think that the story kind of demands its length. It's like, you were asking me how long do I write for my columns. It's whatever feels right for that column, to an extent. If I write too long, we'll just have to cut some of that. But the story sometimes demands its own length. This pulp adventure is a character that I came up with back in the late 80s and have been playing around over the years with, and mentioned him in a couple of my novels as a fictional character within those worlds. The people in those novels are reading Gideon Argo adventures. And so for this whole project, we were doing short stories. I decided, okay, I'll write a short story about him. And that short story turned out to be 10,000 words long. And then I had to write the rest of it. And I'm edging up on 20,000 words. It'll be a novel eventually, because it's demanding. And that was one I wasn't expecting to do. It wasn't satisfied.
Right. Do you?
They do take up.
Right. That's right. Because there's life there. There's a seed and it grows. That's what they do.
Well, in my first Caliban book, I was driving home one afternoon and I had this scene playing in my head. I was trying to figure out this problem I had, and one of the characters just started. Dialogue between two characters come to mind, and the one guy is a cop, and he's telling the other guy how you mistreated me. You did this to me and you left me behind. And it struck me that he wasn't talking to the other character. He was talking to me, because I had done this terrible thing to him in the book. Just forgot about it. Just left. And he was demanding to come back onto the stage and play, and he turned out to be, a very necessary character for the rest of my life. It was a great discovery, but it was almost like he was, this part of my brain was talking to me.
Right. Nice. We've been talking about a lot of your books. Do you have them close by where you could show us? If not, I have several of them right here, actually. I could grab.
They're up here. This was the first one, Dazed and Raving in the Undercurrents. It's a collection of my columns from 1994 to 2004, and when I say my columns, just the good ones.
I have that one.
And then you have this one probably.
I have the other one too. I probably have them all, but I was going to actually see which ones. Yep, beautiful.
This was the first one. It's got the infamous Piggly Wiggly pig on the back of it. Let's see, Best of Days is a collection that came out of that year-long project. These the best of those 366 days of work.
I have that one.
The Book of Gabriel is actually also came out of that same project. It was serialized during it. Whenever I felt like writing another chapter, that was what came up that night. It took a little work to actually turn it into a cohesive book. And then there's like zombie short stories and a little young adult sci-fi, and this, which is a collection of short stories that I was inspired to write after hearing the songs that my son's band had on their first album.
Nice.
And these two were the anthology for the Panama City Centennial, 2 volumes. And that's I edited that. I do have short stories, but these are my latest 2. This Mortal Flesh is my zombie novel, and Giants in the Earth is the first book in a continuing series about a young magic user as he advances in his life. This one, very proud to say, won worst book cover of the day at worstbookcovers.com. And having seen the others, I think I was the best of the worst.
Okay, I am going to see how many of those I can match, because the shelf's right there, so give me just a second. Let me see. Don't have them all, but I do have several, and this is the Creative Con exclusive edition. And that one. So don't have a full collection, and I do have your first novel, a century novel around here somewhere, but I don't have the young adult, and I guess the ones based on the album, but I have most of them. So, and it's good stuff. While we're talking about your books and your space, share with us your space there. That I'm assuming you create. You're constantly creating, so that means you create in coffee shops and you create in everywhere. But I'm assuming this is a special place to you. Will you tell us a little bit about the room and share with us what's in it?
Well, before I show you my sanctum sanctorum, let me say that I think it's really important that you have a space. Wherever we've lived, I always tried to carve out a space. Our first house was a single wide trailer, and we had a little extra room off the side. That's where I sat and put all my junk and did my writing. And our last house, we had an area that we called the library, which was supposed to be the formal dining room area. It was right off the living room, but that was where all of our books were, and we had our various decorations up in there. But that's where our shared family computer sat, our desktop. And So every night, as the kids would finally be to bed, that's whenever I could get in there and do some work. Now, this house, we've been in this house for a little over 3 years. And when we walked in here, my wife said, "This would be a great spot for you to write in." I said, "Yes." It's the bonus room at the top of the stairs. And give you a little tour. So my wife made that for me.
Nice.
These windows here are gorgeous, look out over an empty field. But we built these bookshelves and put our DVDs and novels and you can see my toys and graphic novels. And let's see, this cabinet here has my albums and my stereo. And back here we have, more bookshelves and toys. And this big giant cabinet here that's got the Mod Podge collage. That's comic books. I'm sorry, it's just the way it is.
Nice.
That giant plastic eagle was one of my Christmas presents this year that Deborah got for me because I'm such a geek. And let's see, I need to show you my old comics.
Wow.
My collection of 60s and 70s. I try to, trade them out from time to time so that a different one's up front.
Nice.
Yeah. And then, action figures and Doctor Who. And then this is the actual desk. I'll try to hold this up so you can see it. It's a mess.
Very nice.
It is a mess.
Nice desk. Nice mess.
The file cabinet there is stuffed full of old notebooks and stories and early versions of manuscripts. And I don't hold on to too much of it. I've got a bag full of stuff I need to go throw out that's from my critique group that I've gone through and worked through. But I do try to keep, at least one of the original versions of stories. So I'm trying to plug you back in here. Just so that I can always go back and see where it started.
Nice. Tell us about the role of comics in your life and their influence on your work.
Wow. Yeah, obviously. I mean, everywhere around here is either imagery or action figures or comics. I don't remember a time I didn't have comics. I know when I was a wee lad, my Uncle Eddie, my dad's brother, would, if I was sick, he'd show up at the front door with 2 or 3 comic books for me to read. And, if I went to my grandma's house, we went down to the drugstore and she bought me a comic book. My cousin David, who lived across the way, he was a few years older than me. He had all the 1960s Marvel comics, dude. I mean, I read.
Wow.
And then my buddy Barry, who was the same age as me, had all the 1970s DC comics. And then my uncle, who was 6 years older than me, in the 70s, introduced me to Jack Kirby's Fourth World, the New Gods, and Mr. Miracle, and Etrigan the Demon, and Commandy, the Last Boy on Earth. So when I was about 10 or 11, I was Commandy all the time. And but then by the time, I got a little bit older, it turned into science fiction stuff. So it was, Isaac Asimov, Ray Bradbury. Let me grab this book. I wrote a blog about this many moons ago. This is the book that made me want to be a writer.
Wow.
Ray Bradbury's Ethos for Spring.
Nice.
That way. gorgeous book. It's this, not actually this, physical book, but they had this book at the Carver Middle School library when I was in 7th grade, and I checked it out, and I read it over and over and over again, and then went back to the library and got everything by Ray Bradbury I could find, and then went from him to, Isaac Asimov, and from him to Arthur C. Clarke, and then Robert Heinlein, eventually Frank Herbert, and so I had a long love affair with sci-fi. Ray Bradbury, man, he's the top.
Yeah, yes, he is.
Yeah. And as you may remember from my Century novel, I fictionalized my effort to write a Ray Bradbury story in high school.
Right. I know you experiment and you're using a lot of genres, but would you say that there are fantasy or science fiction elements that make their way into most everything that you create?
Yeah, I would say so. Even, the closest thing to a real world story that I've written is the Welcome to the Dawning of a New Century, and even that had a teacher who could see people's futures, and it had a kid who was writing sci-fi. So there is, that elevated reality, and I don't know. I look for that, even in life, everyday life. You see the synchronicities that happen. That there's no way that could have. That's a coincidence.
Right.
You see the patterns around you, and I know that's exaggerating and altering it, but that's the fun of fiction.
Absolutely.
I mean, life doesn't make sense, but fiction has to.
Right. Well, yeah, and doesn't, in a lot of ways, fiction make life make sense? You know what I mean?
It does.
Yeah. I think people who are watching would find it very helpful if you talked a little bit about, in terms of your process, your time management. You are obviously producing an enormous amount of writing professionally, day job, as well as, and then and to do that every day in and day out for decades, and yet to then, when it's midnight on Mars, or when it's late and you're up there in this room by yourself, you're still doing it. Maybe talk about how you manage your creative time, and then also, what do you do to nurture your creativity or feed your soul? And if it's not too personal or too or if it's not something you don't want to share, I would love to hear a little more about 2008 and what it was what that was like, and then how you came out of it.
Okay. I joke sometimes. Well, I teach some writing classes for Education Encore and at the Center for the Arts, and I have joked that my process, my work process, is kind of like this.
It's a great process.
It's a lot of that. And time management. I think time management, and it may be sad to admit, what suffers is the stuff that's not writing. Getting the grass cut, getting the garage cleaned out, paying that bill on time. Those sorts of things are like, it's your wife says, "Have you done that?" And you go, "I forgot." Let me tell you about this great idea I had for this story. My wife she's a long-suffering Saint of a lady, I got to tell you.
Yes, she is.
She's something else. But my process, as far as that goes, is that it's on all the time. You know, and I'm going to chase a rabbit here for a second. The steampunk story happened because we were traveling to Birmingham and staying with her sister, who was in the hospital at UAB, and we were there a few times, and you know, so in Birmingham we're surrounded. And you're asking how you feed it. You go to a new place, get away from your normal everyday place. That may just mean going to the beach for the day. You know, when you're in a new city, you notice everything. And you know, you're in Birmingham, and where we live is like a pancake, but my goodness, I was driving a stick shift in Birmingham at a stop sign, and I'm leaned back in the car like this, thinking I had to squall my tires. I'm just not used to that, you know. So you're out of your comfort zones physically and mentally, and looking around the beauty of that area, and they cut the interstate straight through those granite mountains, and the iron leaches out of those rocks, and there's rust. So you know, and all of the Civil War history there, and I'm doing a lot of reading. We're sitting in the hospital. I've got my Kindle, and I'm just, you know, flipping through, and I start chasing rabbits like I do, and I end up reading a whole bunch of steampunk, which is just kind of Victorian style sci-fi, you know, alternate histories often, and wasn't really thinking anything about ever writing any kind of story like this. And then we're driving home on I-65, and we're passing these signs that we've passed
Excuse me.
back and forth various directions. But this time I passed this exit sign for two towns, Jemison and Thorsby. And what happens is, Jemison Thorsby, that's a character name. That's a great character name. Who is Jemison Thorsby? And then I start thinking, well, he's a reporter for the Atlanta newspaper in 1870, and the Civil War has just ended in a stalemate. There's this uneasy truce. It dragged out, and I have this whole thing just, you know.
Nice.
And the next sign we pass is for two other cities, Clanton and Montgomery, and I think, well, Clanton Montgomery is obviously a hero's name. He's the hero of the siege of Birmingham. And then I have this biography for Clanton Montgomery that just starts building itself in my head. And now Jemison and Clanton have to go on an adventure together, right? And
They absolutely have to.
That's my process.
Nice.
That's just always the way it is. But something happens that starts my gears rolling. With this mortal flesh, my process started literally from a nightmare. I woke up from a very bad dream in which I was on a street surrounded by zombies, and things were on fire, and I realized I was a zombie, and I saw them and what they were doing, and I thought, I can't
Excuse me.
I can't survive like this. And I woke up. Well, when I woke up and that image is in my head, the first thing I'm thinking is, okay, what kind of person could survive like that? And then I followed that where it led, and with, as far as that would lead, and that was a pretty dark place. So I don't know if that was exercising something of me or just being willing to go there. I kind of got off the track a little bit.
No, not at all. That's all process. That's all everything. That's great.
And the process depends on being willing to expose yourself, or being willing to not chicken out when the story takes you to a scary place or a disgusting place, or being true to those characters that you've created. And also not being afraid to change that if by the time you get down the road a little ways you realize that's just not going anywhere, that something else might have worked better. Being willing to lose that 10,000 words and go back and start over.
Nice.
It's like an artist who's almost finished with the painting and misses a brushstroke and it ruins it for him, and he just wipes it all away and starts over again. You've got to either be, a little bit masochistic or something.
You know what I think it is? I think you have to, the true artist loves the process. It's I see and hear about so many people who, they say, I don't like to write, I like to have written. And they're concerned about producing and what's being published, put out. But the process, man, the
people who, now it can be agonizing.
Yes, oh yeah.
You're gonna sweat blood, but that's the fun of it too. I mean, if you're not having fun, do something else.
Yeah.
If you're not getting that sense of fulfillment from it, there's a lot of stuff you could do.
Right.
Yeah, and you'd enjoy it a lot more. If it's work, and that's all it is, that's okay for some people. Some people just like to work. I don't. I like to daydream, write it down. I like to ask what's next. What does it mean? I don't know if I can answer those questions, but I chase them.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's John Dufresne that I've heard say that fiction doesn't answer questions, it just asks them.
Right.
I can get behind that.
Yeah.
I think it answers a lot of questions too, but you have to kind of find them on your own.
That's exactly right.
It's very zen.
Yeah. Yes, it is.
The answers are there.
Right. Yeah, because the questions are the answers, Well, I'd like to maybe stop here sort of where we began, because with everything you were just describing, it comes back to listening, where you started, where, that's the process. When you're driving to Montgomery or Birmingham and you see the Clanton and Montgomery signs, you see the ore or the iron coming out of the rock, and that's listening. And I don't think there's any better way to live than to be that open, to be that listening. And what you've said is your process is to be open all the time. There's no off switch. It's just, you're just on. You're just listening. You're just soaking up. You're just taking it in. And to me, there's no better way to live. And I think it's impossible for an artist to live any other way. And it can be painful, and and difficult.
I just got a visitor.
I saw your editor slip into the room. But that quality of hearing.
Olive, say hello, Olive. So
That's all good.
yeah, that is. I think you're right, and I think that you brought up the 2008 problem, and I think what happened there was that I had to shut myself off. February of 2008, Nathan's best friend was killed in a car wreck. And just a couple of weeks after that, my grandmother, who was like a mother to us and to our children, she was their great grandma, but you'd never have known it. She was so involved with them. She died. And it was like a 1-2 punch, and it just kind of broke my brain, broke my heart. I shut down. You know, and when you're wrapped up in grief, you have different ways of coping with it, and I had cried myself out, and at that point, you just have to, you know, put up the cocoon a little bit. And what that did to me creatively was it just stopped everything. And it was several months before I was able to break through that. And I kind of forced myself to. And with the help of Dustin Bryson, who was starting up his website, and his encouragement, and you know, the encouragement of my other friends who are also creative people, and set myself a goal and obligated myself. And there is that certain amount of that even now. You know, my critique group, I feel guilty if I'm not producing pages for them every 2 weeks. I've got to have something to take to them, or I feel like I'm failing. That hasn't really been a problem, but it's there. It's in the back of my head, and that's a good thing. Well, it keeps you working. It keeps you answering to someone, and it also ensures that somebody reads what you write.
Right.
So I hope that helped.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. So to conclude, tell people where they can find you online and where they can find your work.
They can find me at tonysimmons.info, and it has links to all of my books. Also has some book trailers and some a video of a talk we had a couple of years ago, and a couple of a video that Lou and I made. We're trying to put some short films on there too, and I think they'll find some fun stuff there.
Nice.
That's the best place to find me. On Facebook at Tony Simmons Writer. Or is it Writer Tony Simmons? I'm there. Those are the two places I hang out.
Okay.
And now also Facebook, the Arcane Adventures of the Syndicate.
Nice.
Is that group project we're working on right now.
Pulp fiction.
Yeah, we're trying to do an anthology reminiscent of the old pulp magazines. So you'll get your two-fisted ship's captain in Shanghai in 1922, and you'll get your Doc Savage style adventurer in 1933, and who knows what else? Maybe a werewolf shaman, or a demon-possessed artist.
Nice. Very cool. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you doing this. I appreciate all that you've shared. It's been wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting.
And thanks for all the great work.
Thank you. I've got a similar shelf over here that's full of Michael Lister books.
Thank you. So TonySimmons.info.
Those two.
What's that?
Looking forward to getting a copy of Cataclysmos.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Well, take care, and thanks again, and talk to you soon.
All right.
Good night.